The Warmth Beneath Hollowmere, a story of one widow's wisdom, Montana Territory, 1893. This story is a work of historical fiction inspired by real settler experiences and the documented earth-sheltered building traditions of Acadian, Salish, and Northern European peoples. The thermometer outside the Hollowmere General Store read 47 degrees below zero on the morning of December the 23rd, 1893. The mercury had given up. It had crawled into its little glass bulb and stopped trying. The wind they called the widow's wail was tearing strips of cedar shake off rooftops 3 generations old. But up on the Crow's Shoulder, that miserable patch of stone the locals had laughed about for 40 years, a woman and her small son were sitting in the dark. They were not shivering. They were not weeping. They were warm. The boy was playing with a wooden horse his father had carved before the mine took him. The woman was stirring a pot of bean soup over a small iron stove. Her cheeks were flushed with heat. The dog at her feet was sound asleep with his belly turned to the warmth. They were not in the cabin. They were in the earth. And the town, the very same town that had called her the mole woman and bet money on her death, was about to come crawling up that hill on hands and knees, begging her to let them in. This is the story of how she got there. Her name was Nora Beaumont. She was 33 years old that autumn, born in a fishing village on the coast of Nova Scotia, where her grandmother Marguerite had spoken French and built stone walls and remembered things the world had forgotten. Nora had come west 6 years before with a husband named Etienne, a soft-spoken Acadian boy with hands like a piano player's and a head full of silver dreams. They had landed in Hollowmere, Montana, in the spring of 1887. He had taken work in the Silver Reach mine. They had a son 2 years later. They named him Mathieu, after Etienne's father, though everyone in town called him Matty before he could walk. Etienne had been a good man. Not a smart man, perhaps. Not a careful man, but a good one. He sang to the boy in French at night. He bought his wife a silver hairpin for their 5th anniversary, even though they could not afford it. And he died on the 15th of September, 1893. A beam gave way in the south shaft of the Silver Reach mine. 23 tons of mountain came down on the men below. They never recovered his body. They buried an empty coffin. The auction came 5 weeks later. The creditors had circled like crows the moment the funeral ended. There had been nothing for Nora to do but watch her life sold off in pieces on the front porch of the boarding house. The piano went first, then the wedding linens, then the iron stove Etienne had bought her the Christmas Mattie was born. The neighbors bid with their heads down, mumbling apologies they thought she couldn't hear. Mrs. Coombs bought the silver hairpin for 40 cents. Mattie did not cry. He held tightly to the dog, a brown and white border collie named Juno. Etienne had brought the dog home one rainy afternoon from a sheep herder in the valley. The dog had loved Etienne. After the mine, the dog had refused to eat for 9 days. Now the dog leaned against the boy's small body and watched the strangers carry the kitchen table down the steps. His tail did not move at all. When the auctioneer had gone and the porch was empty, Nora sat down on the top step. She opened the only thing left in her keeping, a small cedar chest. Inside were Etienne's pipe, a pocket watch with the glass cracked, 2 letters from his mother in Quebec, and 1 envelope she had never seen before. It was addressed to her, in his handwriting, sealed but not stamped. She opened it with hands that did not seem to belong to her. "My darling Nora," it began, "if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and I am sorry. I am sorry for the debts. I am sorry for the dream, but there are things you must know." She read it twice. Then she folded it and pressed it against her chest. She stared at the dusty street where her piano had stood 10 minutes before. Etienne had written that he no longer trusted his own brother. That Cyrus sat on the board of the Silver Reach mine. That Cyrus had voted 3 times in 3 separate meetings against the safety repairs that everyone knew the South Shaft needed. That Cyrus had voted no the very week before the collapse. That Cyrus had been watching the Crow's Shoulder for a long time, the way a wolf watches a wounded deer, and that his uncle, the old man who had owned the shoulder before them, had died one night 3 years before in circumstances that had never quite added up. A fall, a broken neck, found at the bottom of the rocky path with no witnesses. The will had been changed 2 weeks earlier, leaving the land to Etienne. and Cyrus had been the first to find the body. "There is something on that land," Etienne wrote. "Uncle Auguste told me once. He said the surface was cursed, but the bones below were full of grace. I never understood him, but Cyrus understood. I think he understood from the very beginning. Sell that land to no one, my love. Not for any price. Not to my brother, especially not to my brother." She put the letter back in the chest. She closed the lid. She sat there in the cold autumn light, and a thing inside her that had been broken for 5 weeks slowly began to harden into something else. Not hope. Hope was a soft word, a luxury word. What she felt was older than hope. It was the kind of thing the Acadian women in her grandmother's village had carried in their pockets during the deportations. The kind of thing you cannot break because it has already been broken 100 times before you were born. Matty climbed into her lap. He smelled of dust and dog and small boy. He put his hand on her cheek. "Maman," he said. "Maman, est-ce qu'on a perdu la maison?" "Yes," she told him. "Yes, my love. We have lost the house. Where do we live now?" She looked up at the mountains, at the dark shoulder of stone that rose above Hollowmere like the back of some sleeping animal, and she did not yet have an answer. Cyrus Beaumont came to her that same afternoon. He found her in the back room of the boarding house, where the proprietor had let her stay one more night out of pity. He was a heavy man, 38 years old, 2 years younger than his brother had been, with thick, sandy hair pomaded flat against his skull, and a brown wool suit that strained at the buttons. He had the look his brother had never quite had, the look of a man who has eaten well every day of his life. He removed his hat. He sat down across from her on the only other chair in the room. He did not look at Matty, who was sitting in the corner with Juno, watching with the silent attention of a child who has learned that men in suits bring bad news. "I have been to see the lawyer," Cyrus said. "The shoulder is yours, free and clear. Auguste's debts died with him, and Etienne's debts have been settled by the auction. The land is the last thing you own in this world." She did not answer. "I would like to buy it from you," he said. $200, cash, today." His eyes flicked toward Matty for the first time. Just a flick, a glance of measurement, the way a butcher looks at a piece of meat. "That is more than the land is worth," he said. "Considerably more. It would be enough to take the boy back to Halifax, back to your people. There is nothing for you here, Nora. The winter is coming. The mountain does not care about widows." She thought of the letter. She thought of her Uncle Auguste, with his broken neck at the bottom of a path. She thought of Etienne in the dark of the mine. She thought of the silver hairpin Mrs. Coombs had bought for 40 cents. She said no. Cyrus's face did not change, but something moved behind it, a flicker, a muscle in the jaw. "You are upset," he said. "Grieving. You are not thinking clearly. Take the night. Sleep on it. I will come back in the morning, and the offer will still stand." He stood. He put on his hat. At the door he turned back. "The mountain," he said, "has killed better people than you, Nora. Do not let it kill the boy, too." Then he was gone, and the door clicked shut, and Juno, who had not made a sound the entire visit, walked over to it and growled low in his throat at the empty hallway. Nora went up the mountain the next morning. She had $38.17 to her name. She spent 22 of it at the general store. A canvas wall tent, a pickaxe, a shovel, a heavy claw hammer, a coil of rope, 2 wool blankets, a small cast iron pot, a sack of pinto beans, a sack of cornmeal, a sack of dried apples, a pound of salt pork, a box of lucifer matches, a tin of lamp oil and a small oil lamp, a bundle of tallow candles, and, at the very last moment, a wedge of hard yellow cheese she did not really need, because Matty's face lit up when she pointed at it. The storekeeper was a woman named Eunice Brackett. She was 60 years old and built like a barrel. Her face was kind in a tired sort of way. She watched Nora pile her purchases on the counter. Her mouth grew tighter and tighter, until at last she could not hold it in any longer. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said, "where are you taking these things?" "Up the shoulder." Eunice Brackett closed her eyes. She put one heavy hand flat on the counter. "Honey," she said, "honey, you cannot live up there. Not with the boy. The winter. I have a place, Nora said. I have a plan. What plan? What place? There is nothing up there but the ruin of old Auguste's bothy and a wind that will skin you alive. Nora looked at her. She had not slept. She had not eaten properly in 5 weeks. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who has nothing left to lose and has therefore become very, very dangerous. You will see, she said. It was the first time she said it. It would not be the last. The path up the crow's shoulder was not a path. It was a rumor of a path. It snaked through gorse and broken granite and twisted juniper trees that had grown sideways because the wind would not allow them to grow up. Nora walked it with Maddie on her back, in a canvas sling she had stitched the night before. Juno walked ahead of them, ears up, nose to the ground, as if he had been there 1,000 times before. He had not. But dogs know things. The ruin sat in a shallow bowl on the south face of the mountain, about 1,000 feet above the valley floor, a tumble of dark granite blocks. The bones of a shepherd's hut some forgotten Scottish settler had abandoned 100 years before. The wind hit them the moment they crested the last rise. It came down off the high peaks with a sound like a woman keening over a grave. The widow's wail, the old-timers called it. It had a name, because it had killed enough people to earn one. Nora pitched the tent in the lee of the largest standing stone. She gathered an armful of dead juniper twigs and started a small fire in a ring she made from rocks. She boiled water. She made tea. She fed the boy. She let the dog drink from her cupped hand. The sun went down at 4 o'clock. The wind came up at 5. The first night on the mountain, Matty cried himself to sleep against her chest. The tent canvas snapped like a flag in a battle. Juno pressed his body against the boy's legs. Nora lay awake and stared at the dark canvas above her and listened to her grandmother Marguerite singing in her memory. La terre a un cœur qui bat lentement, mon enfant. The earth has a heart that beats slowly, my child. Le soleil de l'été s'enfonce dans la pierre et s'y endort. The summer sun sinks into the stone and falls asleep there. Et même au plus profond de l'hiver, si tu sais écouter, tu peux l'entendre respirer. And even in the deepest winter, if you know how to listen, you can hear it breathing. She had been 7 years old when her grandmother had told her that. She was sitting on the dirt floor of a stone cottage in Cape Breton, and a coal fire was glowing in the hearth, and her grandmother's hands had smelled of lavender and wood smoke. She had not understood. She had thought it was a story. She did not yet know it was a map. The stranger came on the 3rd day. She was outside the tent, splitting kindling when she looked up, and he was simply there, standing at the edge of the rocks, as if he had grown out of the stone. An old man, Salish. His hair was iron gray and braided down his back in 2 heavy ropes. His face was so weathered it looked like the bark of some ancient tree. He wore a wool coat of dark blue trade cloth. Around his neck was a string of small bones and turquoise beads. Juno did not bark at him. Juno walked over and sat down at the old man's feet. He looked up at the old man's face, as if waiting for instructions. Nora put down the hatchet. The old man spoke first. Your husband's uncle was a friend to me, he said. His voice was soft and rough at the same time. Auguste Beaumont. He sat with me by fires when no other white man would. He listened to old stories. He believed them. She did not know what to say. My name is Sequaki, he said. Some call me Joseph. Either is true. I have lived on this mountain longer than your people have known it had a name. She nodded. August called this place the Crow's Shoulder, the old man said, but my people called it something older. We called it the place where the earth breathes. Do you know why? No. Because in winter, when you put your hand to the ground in the right spot, the earth breathes back. It is warm. Not much, but enough. The summer is buried here. It is sleeping under the stones. White men come here and they build wooden boxes above the ground, and the wind eats them alive. They never think to ask the mountain what it wants. He looked at her. His eyes were very black and very calm. Do not sell this land, he said. Do not build above the ground. Ask the mountain. Listen to what it tells you. Then he turned and walked away. Juno watched him go. The dog's tail moved once, slowly, in something that was almost a wave. Nora called after him. How? She said. How do I ask? The old man did not turn around. You are already asking, he said. You are listening now. Keep listening. Then he was gone behind the rocks, and there was no sound but the wind. And Juno came back to her and pressed his cold nose into her palm. Friends, before we go any further, I want you to do something. I want you to imagine you are Nora. You have lost your husband. You have lost your home. Your brother-in-law has threatened the only thing you have left. And now, a stranger, a man from a people most settlers in this part of the country were terrified of, comes out of the rocks and tells you to trust the mountain. Would you trust him? Would you stay? Or would you take the $200 and run for the train back east? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know. Type 1 if you would stay. Type 2 if you would run. Then keep listening, because what happens next will surprise you. 3 days later, on the morning of the 23rd of October, Nora found the warmth. She had been clearing the rubble of the old bothy. There was no real plan to it. She was simply moving stones because moving stones felt like progress, and progress felt like staying alive. She had been at it since dawn. Her hands were blistered raw beneath the leather work gloves Eunice had pressed into her palm that last morning at the store. Maddie was sitting on a flat rock nearby, building a little fort out of pebbles. Juno was digging at something near the center of the ruin, throwing dirt between his back legs with the businesslike concentration of a terrier going after a rat. She had pried up a large, flat slab of granite, about the size of a tabletop, and rolled it to one side. She bent down to clear the earth beneath it, and the earth exhaled into her face. She froze. It was not warm in the way a stove is warm. It was not even warm in the way a sun-warmed rock is warm. But it was warmer, distinctly, unmistakably. The air outside that morning was perhaps 12 degrees above zero. A wind was running over her hands. Her cheeks were stiff with cold, but the breath coming up out of that hole in the ground was something altogether different, steady, damp, patient. The temperature, perhaps, of a root cellar in November, 40 degrees, maybe a little more. It smelled of moss and old stone and the deep places of the world. She put her hand into the cavity. She felt it on her skin. She closed her eyes. La terre a un cœur qui bat lentement, mon enfant. She began to laugh. She laughed, and she could not stop laughing. Matty stood up from his rock fort and came over with a worried expression. He had not heard his mother laugh since before the mine. Juno trotted up behind him, dirt on his nose. Nora pulled the boy down beside her and put his small hand into the warm breath of the earth. Touche, she said. Touche, mon trésor. Matty's eyes went very wide. C'est chaud, maman, he whispered. C'est chaud. She kissed the top of his head. The wind howled above them. The earth breathed slowly below them. And in that small, impossible moment, on the side of a mountain everyone in 3 counties had laughed about for 100 years, Nora Beaumont understood what she was going to do. She was not going to build a house. She was going to dig one. She was not going to fight the mountain. She was going to crawl inside it. She was going to let the crow's shoulder become her wall, and her roof, and her shield, and her cradle. She was going to bury her grief and her boy and her dog inside the only thing in this world that had ever offered her a warm breath in answer to her cold hands. She would build below, she would build into, she would let them call her the mole woman if they wanted to. Let them bet on her death in the back of the saloon. Let Cyrus stand at the bottom of the path and watch her dig. She was going to win this winter. She did not yet know how. She did not yet know what it would cost. She did not yet know that her own brother-in-law would knock on her door in the worst blizzard in 20 years and beg her to let him in. She did not yet know about the old iron box that was waiting 8 feet beneath her boots. She did not yet know that an old man with bone beads at his throat was going to come back, bringing his granddaughter and bringing wisdom older than the United States itself. But she knew the earth was warm, and for the first time since the 15th of September, she let herself feel something other than grief. She stood up. She brushed the dirt from her knees. She picked up the pickaxe. She looked down the mountain at the little town of Hollowmere, where the chimneys were already pluming smoke against the pewter sky, and she spoke out loud, to no one and to everyone. "You will see," she said. Then she swung the pickaxe down into the earth, and the next chapter of her life began. She dug for 6 straight days before anyone came to mock her. The work was brutal, the kind of work that breaks soft hands and softer spirits, The kind of work that grown men in the valley below would have done in shifts of 3, taking turns to rest and to eat and to nurse blistered palms. Nora did it alone. She did it with a 5-year-old boy passing her small rocks, and a brown and white border collie standing watch on the ridgeline. She did it because the alternative was Cyrus, and the alternative was the train back east. And the alternative was a life lived as a charity case in someone else's parlor. She started by clearing the footprint of the old shepherd's bothy. She tossed the smaller stones down the slope, where they clattered into the gorse. The larger blocks she set aside in careful piles, sorting them by size and by the flatness of their faces. She had remembered something from her grandmother's village. The way the old stone walls along the Cape Breton coast had stood for 200 years without a drop of mortar. The way the stones had simply fitted themselves into one another. Every stone holding down the one below and being held in turn by the one above. It was called dry stone walling. It was older than Rome. Her grandmother had said it was a kind of prayer. The way the stones learned to love each other if you were only patient enough to listen to how they wanted to lie. So Nora listened. She listened with her hands, with her aching shoulders, with the small of her back where the muscles had begun to knot like rope, and slowly, in the bottom of that bowl on the south face of the mountain, a hole began to take shape, 3 feet deep, then 4, then 5. The earth was hard for the first foot, frozen at the surface, but below that it grew softer and warmer and easier to move. By the 3rd foot, the temperature against her cheek was holding steady at something near 50 degrees. By the 5th foot, the wind was a memory, only a sound somewhere above her head. While inside the cut she made, she could hear her own breathing, and Juno panting softly, and Matty singing a song his father had taught him in French. She slept like the dead each night. She woke before dawn each morning. She ate beans and cornmeal and a small piece of cheese, and she dug. Friends, I want to stop here for just a moment. I want you to consider what this woman is doing. She has no engineer. She has no carpenter. She has no husband. She has no money. She has 33 years, a 5-year-old child, a dog, and a half-remembered story her grandmother told her in French when she was 7. And she is going to bet her life and her son's life on it. Right now, at this point in our story, type 1 in the comments if you still think Nora is mad. Type 2 if you have started to believe in her. I am going to tell you the truth. When I first heard this story, I typed 1. By the end, I was crying. Let's keep going. The mocking started on the 7th day. The first one up the path was the mayor. His name was Marmaduke Pritchard, but everyone in Hollowmere called him Duke, because Marmaduke was the kind of name a man cannot wear with dignity past the age of 12. He was 60 years old. He had run a grain warehouse in Bozeman before he came to Hollowmere, and he had been the mayor for 11 years because no one else wanted the job. He had survived 4 Montana winters, and he believed this made him an expert on survival. He climbed up the path with 2 of his cronies behind him. He stopped at the edge of the pit. He put his hands on his hips. He looked down at Nora. She was standing waist deep in the earth. Mud streaked across her forehead, a pickaxe in her hand. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said. "Mrs. Beaumont, I have come up here as a courtesy." She did not answer. She set down the pickaxe. She wiped her hands on the apron she had tied over her skirt. "Folks in town are talking," the mayor said. "Folks are worried. We have a young woman alone on a mountain with a small child, digging what looks for all the world like a grave. We have responsibilities to one another, Mrs. Beaumont. Christian responsibilities. I have come up to ask you, formally, to come down to the valley and let the church find you respectable lodging until you are well." "Until I am well? Until you are yourself again?" She looked at him for a long moment. "This is myself," she said. "This is exactly who I am." The mayor's face tightened. He glanced at his cronies. He looked back at her. "Boy is digging her own grave with her mother's hands. That is what folks are saying. That is what I am telling you they are saying. You may not like to hear it, but I am telling you for your own good." She did not look away from him. "You will see," she said. The mayor opened his mouth to reply, then closed it, then opened it again. Then he turned around and walked back down the path with his cronies trailing behind him, muttering. That night, In the small light of her tallow candle, Maddie climbed into her lap inside the tent. He was quiet. He was thinking. 5-year-old boys do not often think for long stretches, but when they do, the silence is louder than any noise they make. "Maman," he said at last, "what is a grave?" She held him tighter. She kissed his hair. "It is a place where bodies sleep," she said, "but we are not making one of those. We are making a place where we will be alive. The warmest house in all of Holomere." He thought about this. "Will Papa be warm too?" he asked. Her throat closed. "Papa's already warm," she said. "Papa is in heaven, and the part of him that stayed with us, mon trésor, is going to live in the walls of our new house. Every stone we set is a little bit of him." He nodded against her chest. He fell asleep with his small fist closed around a button from his father's coat. Outside, the wind moaned over the ruin. Inside the cut she had made in the earth, the breath of the mountain rose slow and steady and warm, and waited for them. The doctor came on the 9th day. Dr. Ezra Whitaker, 46 years old, trained at the University of Pennsylvania, the only man in 3 counties with an actual medical degree. He came in a small black buggy. He wore a city suit and a beaver felt hat. He climbed the path with the slow disgust of a man whose boots were never meant to touch dirt. He examined the pit. He examined Maddie, who was scrubbed pink and well-fed and as healthy a child as any 5-year-old in Holomere. He examined Nora. He looked at her hands, which were a ruin of broken blisters and grimy bandages. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said, "I have been asked by certain concerned parties to assess the suitability of this environment for a small child." He let the words hang there. "Damp earth," he said, "breeds consumption, mold, putrefaction of the lungs. To raise a child below the surface of the ground, in this climate, is to invite disease into his very bones. I am telling you this not as a neighbor, Mrs. Beaumont, but as a physician. The medical consensus is unequivocal. What you are doing will kill that boy." She looked at him. She thought of the warm breath of the earth on her hand. She thought of the dryness inside the cut, the way the air smelled of stone and not of rot. She thought of every stone cellar in Nova Scotia where babies had been born and grown old and died of nothing but old age, generation after generation, century after century. She did not say any of this. "You will see," she said. The doctor's mouth thinned to a line. He nodded once. He climbed back into his buggy. He drove away. The Reverend came on the 11th day. His name was August Holloway. He was 38. He had a long, pale face and kind gray eyes. He was by all accounts a good man who genuinely believed everything he said. He stood at the edge of the pit with his hat in his hand. He spoke very softly. The way a man speaks to a creature he is afraid to startle. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said, "the Lord made the trees to stand above the ground. He made man to walk upon the earth, not within it. The peoples of the Bible built their houses of stone and timber and lifted them up toward heaven, that they might be reminded daily of the one who dwells above us. To burrow into the ground is the work of foxes, of badgers, of things that hide from God." He paused. He looked at the dog at her feet. He looked at the small boy holding her hand. "I am not saying you are pagan, Mrs. Beaumont. I am saying that despair sometimes drives us to consider pagan things. I am offering you the church. I am offering you a Christian home for the winter. I am offering you the embrace of a community that loves you." She looked at him for a long time. He was, she realized, the only one of them who actually believed he was helping. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend," she said, "but the Lord also made the badger, and the badger lives." She turned and went back to her digging. Reverend Holloway stood there for another full minute. Then he put his hat on. Then he walked back down the path. He did not look back. By the end of the 2nd week, the mocking had become a small industry. Mrs. Prudence Coombs, the postmaster's wife, had taken it upon herself to be the official narrator of Nora's slow descent into madness. She told the story to anyone who would listen, in the post office, in the church vestibule, in the back of the general store, where Eunice Brackett listened with her arms folded and her mouth tighter than a fist. Mrs. Coombs's stories grew more lurid with each telling. By the end of the 2nd week, Nora had been variously described as drinking spirits up there alone, communing with the Salish in unspeakable ways, neglecting the child unto starvation, and once, in a particularly imaginative version, talking to her dead husband out loud in the wind. The young men of the town began to bet on her. The leader of this crew was a 19-year-old blacksmith's apprentice named Bram Coltrane. He was tall and broad in the shoulders, with red hair and a face full of freckles, and a voice that carried a half-mile. He bet $5 at the saloon that the widow would be dead before Christmas. He bet another $2 that the boy would be dead first. He laughed when he said it. The men around him laughed too, though some of them only laughed because Bram was laughing. Friends, I want to be honest with you. There are people in this story who are about to do terrible things. There are also people who are about to be terribly wrong. Bram Coltrane is about to be terribly wrong, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to make up for it. But right now, in this moment, he is just a 19-year-old boy with too much energy and not enough wisdom, betting on a woman's death because the other boys are laughing. We have all known boys like Bram. Some of us have raised them, some of us have married them, some of us, if we are being very honest, have been them. Hollis Tate came up the mountain on the 14th day. He was 58 years old. He had fought in the Union Army at Shiloh and at Vicksburg. He had buried a wife 3 winters back, a woman named Esther who had died of a fever. He had not remarried because there had been no one in Hollowmere he could imagine sitting in Esther's chair. He ran a small sheep operation a mile down the valley. His face was carved out of weather and grief in equal measure, and he did not waste words on anyone. Not ever. Not even himself. He came up leading a mule. The mule was loaded with a sack of potatoes, a wheel of hard yellow cheese, a small jar of pickled beets, a folded wool blanket, and a thick pair of new leather work gloves. He stopped at the edge of the pit. He did not call out. He just stood there until Nora looked up and saw him. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said. "Mr. Tate." He glanced into the hole. He glanced at the small pile of stones she had begun to fit into a wall along one side. He glanced at Maddie, who had popped up from behind a boulder with Juno close on his heels. He said nothing for a long moment. "You are going to die up here," he said. "You know that." "I do not think so." He looked at her. He looked at the boy. He looked back at her. "My Esther," he said. "My Esther was Cornish, from a fishing village out by the cliffs. She used to tell me her grandmother lived in a cottage half dug into a hillside. The whole back wall was earth. She said it was warm as a coal stove in February. Nora, set down here pickaxe. The old stone walls in my grandmother's village, she said, are 200 years old, and the cellars are warm in winter and cool in summer. The earth has a heart that beats slowly." Hollis Tate looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his face. Not belief, not yet, but the beginning of something that was no longer scorn. "I do not know what you are doing," he said at last, "but I know stubborn when I see it, and I know my Esther would have wanted me to leave these things at your tent." He set the supplies down on the ground. He turned the mule around. He started back down the path. "Mr. Tate," Nora called after him. He paused. "Thank you," she said. He did not turn around. He raised one hand in the air, a small gesture, almost a wave, and then he was gone around the bend in the path. She did not see him again for 9 days. But every Tuesday morning, at the bottom of the path, she found another small offering, a sack of dried apples, a glass jar of honey, a small tin of coffee that must have cost him dear. He never came up. He never spoke to her. The offering simply appeared, like grace, and she carried them up the mountain with tears she did not quite understand standing in her eyes. 3 nights later, descending the path to fetch water from the spring, Nora heard voices below. She crouched behind a juniper. There, in the moonlight, stood Cyrus and Hollis Tate. Cyrus was holding out a small leather pouch. Her heart turned to ice. Then she heard Hollis's voice, low, full of contempt, the voice of a man who had buried young soldiers and a wife, and was past being afraid of anything in a brown suit. "You think I would take your money? Your brother is dead because of you, Cyrus Beaumont. I would sooner shake hands with the devil." Hollis knocked the pouch from Cyrus's hand. It hit the frozen earth. Silver coins spilled out in the moonlight. They glittered against the dirt like small accusing eyes. "You come near her again," Hollis said, "I will know it, and the next time we speak it will not be with words." Cyrus did not bend down. He did not pick up the coins. He turned on his heel and walked into the dark. Hollis stood there for a long moment, looking down at the silver. Then he bent, slowly, with the stiffness of an old soldier. He gathered every coin. He put them in his own pocket. He walked them down the valley to the little white church at the edge of town. He pushed open the door of the poor box. He dropped the coins inside, one by one, the way a man might say a rosary. Then he closed the box and walked home. Nora climbed back up the mountain with her water bucket, and she sat down beside the dying coals of her fire, and she put her face in her hands, and she cried for the first time in a month, not for what she had lost, for what she had not lost, for the old farmer in the valley who had decided, without ever asking her, to stand between her and the wolf. On the 18th day, the pit was 8 feet deep and 12 feet wide. Nora was working at the back wall, chipping away at a dense vein of clay that ran horizontally through the soil, when her pickaxe struck something that rang. Not the dull thud of stone. A ring. A metallic ring. Juno, who had been napping on a sun-warmed rock, lifted his head and growled low in his throat. She cleared the dirt with her hands. Her fingers found the edge of something hard and square, iron by the feel of it, rusted and pitted but still solid. She worked it loose. It came out of the wall slowly, the earth giving it up with a small sigh, as if the mountain had been holding it for her all this time. It was a small iron strongbox, about the size of a family Bible, locked. She sat back on her heels. She looked at Matty, who was watching her with his eyes round. She looked at the dog, who had stopped growling and was now staring intently at the box, as if he knew. She broke the lock that night with the back of her claw hammer, by the light of 2 tallow candles, in the tent, with the wind screaming outside. Inside the box was a folded leather pouch, a hand-drawn map of the crow's shoulder showing the bothy and the path and 3 small marks of red ink near the back wall of the bowl. A sheaf of papers covered in cramped handwriting that she recognized at once as her Uncle August's hand, and, wrapped in oilcloth, a small chunk of gray rock streaked with veins of something that gleamed dully in the candlelight. She picked up the rock. She held it close to the flame. Silver, pure, native silver, the kind that runs in narrow veins in country rock, the kind that makes men do terrible things to other men. She unfolded the papers. She read by candlelight while Matty slept and the wind moaned outside. Her Uncle Auguste had found the vein 18 months before he died. He had been working it quietly, alone, taking out small amounts and assaying them through a quiet man in Helena. The vein was small but rich, not a fortune, but enough for a small inheritance, enough for a family to live decently for the rest of their lives. He had told no one in Holomere. He had not even told Etienne, but he had told Cyrus. He had told Cyrus the week before he died. He had told Cyrus because Cyrus was the banker, and Auguste had wanted to set up a trust for Etienne and Nora and the boy. He had wanted to do it quietly, discreetly. He had not yet had time to change his will to name the trust. But he had told Cyrus the broad outlines, and Cyrus had nodded gravely and said he would have all the papers ready by the following Monday. Auguste had been found dead on the path on Sunday. Nora sat in the candlelight with her uncle's papers spread out on her lap, and she understood finally completely what kind of man her brother-in-law was. He had not pushed Auguste off a cliff. There was no proof of that. There would never be proof of that. But he had known, and he had stayed quiet, and the mine collapse that had killed Etienne had been because Cyrus, as a director of the mine company, had voted 3 times to delay safety repairs in the south shaft. Cyrus had not killed her husband, but he had let her husband die, and he had done it because he wanted the crow's shoulder and the silver beneath it, and the small fortune that could have set her family free. She did not cry. She had no more tears in her, not for that. She put the papers back in the box. She put the box at the bottom of her cedar chest, beneath Etienne's letter and his pipe and the silver hairpin she had not been able to keep. She blew out the candles. In the dark, Juno crawled up against her side. The dog put his chin on her thigh. Matty murmured something in his sleep and turned over. She lay there listening to the wind, and she made a promise. She was not going to use the silver against Cyrus. She was not going to take him to court. She was going to live. She was going to build her house in the earth. She was going to raise her boy. She was going to outlast him and outlive him and let the truth of who she was answer the lie of who he was. She did not yet know that Cyrus was about to come for her with the full weight of the law. Cyrus came back on the 18th of November. He did not come alone. He brought Judge Lemuel Hawkins with him. The judge was 67 years old, a thin gray man with a thin gray beard. He and Cyrus had been hunting partners for 15 years. They had killed deer together. They had killed elk together. They had sat in the back of Cyrus's bank on Friday afternoons and drunk Kentucky bourbon and called each other by their Christian names. The judge climbed the path slowly. He stopped at the top, breathing hard. He looked at the pit. He looked at the stones piled in walls. He looked at Mattie, who was sitting on the threshold of the tent with Juno's head in his lap. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said, "Your Honor, I will not waste your time with pleasantries. Your brother-in-law has petitioned the court for an emergency review of the welfare of your minor son. Under the laws of Montana Territory, when a guardian is judged to be subjecting a child to conditions injurious to his health and safety, the court has the authority to remove that child to a more suitable environment. This is a serious matter, Mrs. Beaumont. I am here to make a determination." She felt the ground shift very slightly beneath her boots. She did not let it show on her face. Cyrus stood behind the judge with his hat in his hand. His face was a careful mask of brotherly concern, but she had seen the look in his eyes when he glanced at Mattie in the boarding house, and she saw it again now. The judge cleared his throat. "I am giving you until the winter solstice," he said, "the 21st of December. On that date, I will return to this site and inspect the dwelling. If, in my judgment, the dwelling provides adequate shelter, warmth, sanitation, and safety for the child, the petition will be dismissed. If it does not, the child will be removed and conveyed to his maternal grandmother in Halifax pending further proceedings." She did not answer for a long moment. Mattie, behind her, said, "Maman, stay in the tent, Montrezor. Stay with Juno." He stayed. The dog put one paw across the boy's small ankle, as if to say, "I have him." "That is 33 days, the judge said. "I trust you will use them well." She nodded. Cyrus, behind the judge, allowed himself the smallest curl of the lip. "Friends, listen to me. Listen carefully. I want you to put yourself in this woman's place right now. She is alone on a mountain. She has 33 days to dig a house out of the side of a hill, with nothing but a pickaxe and a shovel and her own bleeding hands, or her child will be taken from her and shipped across a continent to a grandmother she has never met. The man taking him is the same man who let her husband die. The judge taking him is his hunting partner. The deck is stacked. The clock is ticking. What would you do? What would any of us do? Tell me in the comments before I tell you what Nora did. Because what she did next, no one in Hollomere saw coming. 2 days later, the Salish came back, and this time, they brought help. Chiquaki's standing elk came up the path on the 20th of November with his granddaughter walking beside him. Her name was Halona. She was 24 years old. She wore a long wool coat and moccasins with the fur turned inward. Her black hair was bound in a single braid that fell down her back to her waist. She carried 2 large bundles wrapped in oiled hide. The old man carried a third. They set the bundles down at the edge of the pit. The old man straightened up. He looked at Nora's hands, at the bandages stained dark with blood, at the bruises on her forearms. "You are listening," he said, "but you are not yet hearing everything." He nodded at his granddaughter. "She will teach you. I have walked far enough in this life. She has the strong back now, and she has the words your people will understand." Halona stepped forward. Her voice was low and even, the way her grandfather's was. But there was a smile somewhere behind her eyes that the old man had grown too tired to carry. "My grandfather says you remind him of his sister," she said. "She built her own house once. He helped her. He is too old to help you with his hands. So he sent me." Nora did not know what to say. She felt her eyes fill with tears she had not expected. She blinked them away. "Why?" she said. "Why would you help me?" Halona looked at her for a long moment. "Because Auguste Beaumont sat with my grandfather by the fire," she said. "Because your husband's uncle was a good man. because there are very few good men in this part of the country, and when one of them dies, his family is owed a debt. We are here to pay it." She knelt down beside the bundles. She unwrapped the first one. Inside were 10 buffalo hides, 3 of them, heavy, pick, the fur dense as a winter coat. "These go between the stone and the earth," she said. "They keep the cold from creeping in along the seams. Buffalo robe holds the warmth like nothing else. My people have used them in pit houses for 1,000 years. She unwrapped the second bundle. Sinew cord, coils of it, stronger than any rope Nora had ever seen, for binding the roof beams to the stone walls, so the wind cannot lift them. And the third bundle, inside was a small pouch of seeds and a folded piece of birch bark covered in careful black markings. "Sod," Halona said, "living sod. You will lay it on the roof in the spring. The roots will bind everything together. The grass will grow. From a distance, no one will know your house is there. The mountain will take it back into itself. And the snow will sit on top of the sod all winter, and it will be the warmest blanket the world has ever made." Nora sat down on a stone. She put her hands over her face. She did not cry, but she came very close. When she could speak again, she said, "I have 31 days. They are going to take my son if I do not have a house by the winter solstice." Halona looked at her grandfather. The old man looked at the pit. Then he looked at the sky. 31 days, he said, is enough. If you do not sleep." So they did not sleep. For the next 11 days, Halona Standing Elk and Nora Beaumont worked the crow's shoulder from before dawn until long after dark. The old man came up twice a day to sit on a stone and watch and offer quiet advice. He did not lift the heavy things. He no longer could, but he had built 2 pit houses in his youth, and his eyes saw what the women's eyes were too tired to see. The work went faster than Nora could have believed possible. Halona showed her how to angle the entrance to the northwest into the prevailing wind, so that the wind itself would pack snow against the door and seal it shut. She showed her how to step the earthen walls back as they went up, in shallow benches, so that the weight of the soil above pushed down rather than out. She showed her how to lay the buffalo robes against the bare earth where the stone walls met the slope, so that no breath of cold could find its way through the seams. The walls rose, the 2 long dry stone walls flanking the cut Nora had made in the hillside. Halona was as skilled at dry stone walling as any Cape Breton mason. Where Nora's wall wavered, Halona's sang. The stones fitted themselves to each other under her hands as if they had been waiting their whole lives for the right woman to come along. Matty fetched small stones in his apron. Juno carried sticks in his mouth, dropping them at his small master's feet as if he were helping. The old man watched and smoked a small pipe, and sometimes told a story in his own language that Halona translated into soft English at the end of the day. On the 2nd of December, they began the roof. This was the hardest part. This was the part that could kill them. Nora had no timber long enough. The trees on the shoulder were study twitty of the flattest, longest slabs of granite Nora had pulled from the bothy ruins, 5 of them, each one nearly 6 feet long and 3 inches thick, each one heavier than a grown man. They would be the rafters. They would span the gap between the 2 stone walls and the earthen bank at the back, and they would carry the weight of the sod and the snow and the years. Moving them was a horror. They used ropes and rollers made of juniper branches. They used Hollis Tate's mule, which the old farmer sent up, without being asked, with a note pinned to its halter that said simply, "Bring her back." They used their own backs and shoulders and the patient, unhurried strength of 2 women who had decided not to fail. On the 4th of December, while they were dragging the 3rd slab into place, it slipped. It slipped because the rope, frayed from days of work, snapped without warning. Halona threw herself backward, and the slab dropped 2 feet, and then it caught against the stone wall, and for one terrible second, it hung there at an angle. Matty had been standing directly below it. Nora did not remember moving. She remembered only the boy in her arms, and the sound of the slab settling against the wall, and the silence afterward. Her right hand was bleeding badly. She had caught the falling rope with her bare palm. The hemp had stripped the skin away in a long red ribbon. Halona was on her knees, breathing hard. Tsikwaki was already coming down from his stone, faster than an old man should be able to move. Juno was standing between Maddie and the slab, his teeth bared, growling at the granite as if it were a living thing. Halona bound Nora's hand with a strip of buckskin and a paste of yarrow, leaves the old man chewed and spit into a small bowl. The bleeding stopped within the hour. The hand would scar. The scar would be there for the rest of her life. She would look at it sometimes, in the years to come, when her grandchildren asked her about it, and she would say, "This is where I learned how lucky I was." They finished the roof on the 8th of December. 5 granite slabs laid across the walls, fitted as tightly as the stones would allow, the gaps between them packed with smaller stones. Then with the clay-heavy earth Nora had been hauling up from the deeper part of the pit. Then with a layer of cut juniper boughs. Then with more earth, tamped down hard with the flat of a shovel until it would have held a horse. When they were done, Nora climbed down inside. The wind was howling outside. It had been howling for days. The temperature outside was 9 degrees above zero. Inside, she lit a single tallow candle. The flame burned straight up. It did not flicker. It did not bend. It rose toward the stone ceiling in a perfect quiet column, and Nora stood there looking at it. And she began to weep, finally at last, for the first time since the auction. She wept for Etienne, and for Auguste, and for the woman she had been 5 months ago, and for the woman she had become. She wept until Maddie came down the steps and put his small hand in hers and asked her if she was happy or sad. "Both," she said, "both, mon trésor, both at once." They moved in on the 10th of December. The tent came down. The cedar chest came inside. The small iron stove Hollis Tate had sent up 2 days before, an old pot-bellied thing he had retired from his own kitchen, was set in the front corner with a thin pipe rising up through a hole carefully built into the roof. They sealed the door with planks Nora had pulled from her own packing crates, insulated with the last of the buffalo hide and a thick layer of canvas tacked on the inside. When the door was closed, the howl of the widow's wail vanished, not muffled, gone. The silence inside was the silence of a stone cellar 100 feet beneath a city. The air was still. The dog stretched out on the dirt floor and went to sleep within 10 minutes. Halona walked through the small room one last time. She nodded. "It will hold," she said. "It will hold against anything this mountain can throw at you." Tsikwaki stood at the door. He put one hand on the lentil stone. "This is a good house," he said. Auguste would be proud. Etienne would be proud. We are proud. They left at sundown. They walked down the path together, the old man leaning on his granddaughter's arm. They did not look back. Nora stood at the door of her new home with her son and her dog, and she watched them go until they were small dark shapes against the snow, and then she watched them until they were gone. Judge Hawkins came up the path on the 21st of December at 10 o'clock in the morning. He came alone. Cyrus had wanted to come. The judge had told him no. The judge, for all his faults, was a man who took his duty seriously when it stood in front of him. He had spent the night before reading the Montana statutes on child welfare. He had spent the morning praying, in his own quiet way, that the woman on the mountain had done what she had said she would do. He stopped at the top of the path. He looked around. He looked confused. "Mrs. Beaumont," he called. She came out of the door. She had to come up 3 steps to do it. The judge stared. He had been expecting a tent. He had been expecting a half-finished hole in the ground. What he saw was a low green hummock in the side of the mountain, with a thick wooden door set into a wall of carefully fitted granite. A thin column of pale wood smoke rose from a chimney pipe in the roof. The whole structure was almost invisible from 20 feet away. From 50 feet, you would not have known it was there. She held the door open for him. "Please come in, Your Honor," she said. "Mind the step." He came in. He had to duck slightly. He came down the 3 steps into the main room. He stopped. The air inside was warm, not stove warm, not roaring fire warm, but a comfortable, settled, even 62 degrees. The stove was burning low. A small bed of coals. The walls were earth-packed, firm and dry. And where the dry stone walls rose, the stones were fitted so tightly you could not have slipped a knife blade between them. The floor was hard-packed earth, swept clean, covered in places with a buffalo robe, a small wooden table, 2 stools, a neatly made bed in the corner where Matty was sitting with a book Eunice Brackett had given him, sounding out the words in careful French. The boy looked up. He smiled. His cheeks were pink with health. His eyes were bright. "Bonjour, monsieur," he said. The judge did not speak for a long time. He walked the perimeter, he touched the walls, he looked at the stove, he looked at the small shelf of food, beans, cornmeal, apples, cheese, a jar of pickled beets, a jar of honey. He looked at the boy's bed, which was clean and dry, with 2 thick wool blankets folded neatly at the foot. He looked at the dog, which was lying with its belly to the stove, asleep. He sat down on one of the stools. He took off his hat. He held it in his hands. He looked at Nora. "How?" he said. His voice was very quiet. "How is this warm?" "The earth," she said. "The earth holds the summer in its bones. I only had to dig down far enough to find it." He sat in silence for another long minute. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said at last, "the petition is dismissed. With prejudice. Your brother-in-law will not be permitted to file another one." She let out a breath she had been holding for 33 days. "I want to tell you something," he said, "as a man, not as a judge. There are very few moments in my career when I have been certain I was being shown the truth. This is one of them. I am sorry I came up this path. I should have told Cyrus to find another judge." He stood. He put on his hat. "I will tell him so today," he said, "and I will tell anyone else who asks." Then he climbed the 3 steps and walked out into the snow. Nora stood in her own door and watched him go. The first flakes of the great storm began to fall that evening just after sunset. They came down quietly, almost shyly, small dry flakes sifting through the still air like flour through a sieve. The wind had died. The sky had turned the color of old pewter. The cattle in the valley were uneasy, pressing themselves against the walls of their barns. The dogs in the town were quiet. The barometer in the doctor's office had fallen to a number he had never seen before. The old-timers looked at each other on the porch of the general store. They did not need to speak. They knew the widow's wail was gathering itself for something the country had not seen in 20 years. The storm broke at midnight on the 22nd of December. It did not arrive. It detonated. The wind came back not as a moan but as a solid scream. A single unbroken note that shook the buildings to their foundations and tore loose shingles 3 counties wide. The snow did not fall. It flew, horizontally, in long ropes of stinging crystal, at speeds the old men later swore exceeded 60 miles an hour. The temperature dropped through the floor. By dawn on the 23rd, it was 20 below zero. By noon, it was 30 below. By sunset, the mercury hit 47 below zero on the thermometer outside Eunice Brackett's store, and that was the last reading anyone took, because no one was going outside anymore. In Hollowmere, the houses began to fail. The Holloway parsonage lost its eastern wall just before midnight on the 23rd. The Reverend and his wife and their 2 small children fled across the street to the church, wading through snow that was already chest-deep on the children. They survived because the church was built of stone. Mayor Pritchard's grand house held, barely, but his wife sat by the stove all night in a wool coat and watched her breath turn to fog inside her own kitchen. Bram Coltrane, the 19-year-old who had bet $5 on the widow's death, was huddled in the back of the forge, listening to the wind tear at the roof, wondering in the slow, shocked way of a young man whose joke has turned in his hand whether the woman he had laughed about was still alive, whether anyone he knew was still alive, whether anyone would ever be warm again. On the crow's shoulder, Nora Beaumont and her son and her dog were warm. The stove burned low. The stone walls held. The buffalo hides packed against the seams did exactly what Helona had said they would do. The thick blanket of snow piling up over the sod roof became, just as the old man had promised, the warmest blanket the world had ever made. The temperature inside the small earthen home held steady at 61 degrees. Sometimes it climbed to 63 when the stove was fed. It never dropped below 58, not once. Not even on the 3rd night, when the temperature outside fell to 50 below. Matty did not understand that a storm was happening. He could hear something, far away, like the sound of a train passing on the other side of a hill, but the wall above his head was earth and stone, and the wind could not find him. And his mother was sitting at the small table mending the elbow of his coat, and his dog was sleeping at his feet, and his stomach was full of warm beans. And so the boy slept peacefully through the worst storm in 20 years, and dreamed of his father teaching him to whittle on the front porch of a house that no longer existed. Friends, I want you to stop for a moment. I want you to picture this. Outside the door, the world is dying. A reverend is huddled with his babies in a stone church praying for dawn. A 19-year-old who laughed at a widow is sitting in a forge wondering what he has done. And on the side of a mountain everyone called the Crow's Shoulder, a widow and a 5-year-old boy and a border collie are warm enough to sleep without blankets. The town that called her the Mole Woman is freezing. The Mole Woman is fine. Tell me, before I tell you what happens next. If a man knocked on your door in this storm, the man you knew had let your husband die, would you open it? Yes or no? Comment your answer below before I tell you what Nora did. Hollis Tate knocked on her door at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 24th of December. She heard it through the canvas-padded planks, a weak, irregular knock, the knock of a man whose hands no longer had the strength for one final blow. She opened the door. Hollis Tate fell into her arms. He was covered in snow. His beard was a solid mask of ice. He could not speak. His lips were blue. She dragged him down the 3 steps with Juno barking and Maddie crying out behind her. And she got the door shut, and she sat the old man down on a stool. And she peeled the frozen wool gloves off his hands, and she saw that 2 of his fingertips had gone white. She put his hands in a basin of cool water. Not warm, cool. Her grandmother had taught her that too. You do not put a frozen thing into heat. You bring it back slowly. She made him drink hot broth. She wrapped him in 2 of the wool blankets. She did not speak to him. She let him sit and shake and weep, which he did, silently, for almost an hour. When he could speak, he said, "My roof gave way. My south beam. The snow took it. Where is your stock? The sheep are in the barn. The barn is holding. For now, the dogs are with the sheep. How did you get here?" I followed the fence line. Where the fence ended, I followed memory. I fell 6 times. The last time I did not think I would get up. He looked at her. I came here because I knew. I knew if anyone in this valley was alive, it was you. I came here to be saved by the woman I told myself I felt sorry for. She put her hand on his shoulder. "You are saved," she said. "You are home." He closed his eyes. 2 tears made their way down his frozen cheeks. He did not say anything else for a long time. Cyrus Beaumont came at midnight. He came because he had spent the day in his own house in town, watching his fireplace eat through cordwood at a rate he had never seen. And he had begun to understand, slowly and then very quickly, that he might not survive this storm. His house was the largest in Hollamere, 3 stories, 16 rooms, built for show, built without a single thought for the wind. The wind was finding every seam. The fires he had lit in 3 different rooms were not holding back the cold. But he did not come for shelter. Not yet. Not then. He came because of the silver. He had been brooding for 33 days. The judge had thrown out his petition. The widow had built something on the mountain that everyone in town was talking about. He had not been allowed to inspect it. The judge had refused to bring him along. And in his bank office, on the night of the 23rd, while the wind tore at the roof of his own home, Cyrus Beaumont had finally allowed himself to admit what he had known since Auguste's death. The silver was up there, the widow had it, or she would soon find it, if she had not already. And once the storm passed, the secret he had carried for 3 years would be hers to do with as she pleased. He could not let that happen, so he put on his heaviest coat, and he tucked a small revolver into the pocket, and he set out into the worst storm in 20 years with a half-formed plan to do something terrible to the widow of his own brother. He told himself he would only frighten her. He told himself he only wanted to talk. He told himself many things on the way up the path, and none of them were true. And he knew it. The storm caught him a third of the way up. The wind knocked him down. The snow filled his coat. He lost the path within 10 minutes. He wandered. He fell. He got up. He fell again. The revolver was lost somewhere in a drift behind him. The cold ate through his fine wool coat like fire through paper. He understood, somewhere on that mountain, that he was going to die. And he understood, in the same moment, that he deserved to. He saw the door by accident, a black rectangle in the white. He crawled the last 20 feet on his hands and knees. He beat his frozen fist against the wood. He did not expect her to open it. He had come to kill her. He knew, with the awful clarity of the dying, that he had come to kill her, and now he was begging her to save him. The door opened. Nora stood in the candlelight with her son half hidden behind her skirts and the dog at her side. She looked down at the man in the snow. She knew him at once. She knew, in the same instant, why he had come. She could see it in the shape of his coat pocket, where something heavy had been and was no longer. She could see it in his eyes. Behind her, Maddie whispered Mammon, "Who is that man?" Hollis Tate, sitting up on the stool, said, "Mrs. Beaumont, that is the man who let your husband die." Juno did not growl. The dog stood very still, very alert, watching her face for the signal. Cyrus could not speak. His mouth was too frozen. He could only look up at her. Nora stood in her own doorway, with her warm house behind her and her enemy at her feet, and she thought of her grandmother Marguerite in Cape Breton, and of an old Acadian saying her grandmother had repeated whenever a difficult neighbor came to the door. La terre ne juge pas. La terre garde au chaud. The earth does not judge. The earth keeps warm. She stepped back. She held the door wide open. "Bring him in," she said. Hollis Tate stared at her. "Nora," he said, "do you know what you are doing?" "Yes," she said. "I know exactly what I am doing." They brought Cyrus inside. They sat him on the floor by the stove. They peeled the frozen coat off him. They put his hands in cool water. Maddie stood in the corner, hiding behind Juno's broad back, watching with eyes too old for his small face. Hollis Tate did not speak. He simply did what Nora asked him to do. With the slow, precise movements of a soldier who has learned to follow orders even when his heart does not understand them. It took 2 hours for Cyrus to be able to speak. When he could, he said, "Why?" Nora was sitting at the table. She did not look at him. "Because you are Maddie's uncle," she said. "Because Etienne loved you once. Because my grandmother told me that the earth does not judge. And because, if I had let you die at my door, the warmth in these walls would have gone cold forever." He began to weep. Not the polite weeping of a man caught in an embarrassing moment. The deep, broken weeping of a soul that has finally seen itself in a clear mirror. He wept for a long time. No one spoke. The wind howled above them. The stove burned softly. When he could speak again, he confessed. He confessed everything. The mine, the safety votes, the silver, August, his face on the path that night. Cyrus had not pushed him, but Cyrus had watched the old man stumble on a loose stone, and Cyrus had stood still, and Cyrus had not called out. He had let his uncle fall. He had not gone for help until the body was cold. He confessed the offer of $200. He confessed the petition. He confessed what he had brought up the mountain that night and what he had intended to do. When he was done, the small room was silent. Hollis Tate said, very quietly, "You should have died on the path tonight, Cyrus Beaumont." Cyrus nodded. He could not look up. Nora stood. She walked over to her cedar chest. She opened it. She took out the iron strongbox. She set it on the table. She said, "Auguste left this for Etienne. Etienne left it for me. The silver is small, not a fortune. Enough to live on quietly, enough for Maddie's schooling, enough to keep us through the years." She looked at Cyrus. "I am going to take half," she said. "The other half will go into a trust for the people of Hollowmere who have lost something in this storm. The widows, the children, the old men who cannot button their own collars anymore. Hollis Tate will administer it. You will sign the papers. You will sign them publicly. You will tell everyone in this town what you have just told me. And then you will live the rest of your life as a man who is trying every single day to be worth the breath the earth gave back to him tonight." Cyrus looked up. His face was wet. His mouth was open. "If you ever speak against me," she said, "if you ever come near my son in any way other than as a humble uncle who has earned the right, I will go to the territorial newspapers with these papers, and you will spend the rest of your years in a prison cell. Do you understand me?" He nodded. "Say it." "I understand, Nora. I understand." She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at the stove, at her son in the corner, at the dog beside him, at the old farmer wrapped in 2 wool blankets, at the broken man on the floor by the fire. The wind howled outside. The earth held them all in its warm, dark cradle. The storm broke at dawn on the 27th of December. When Hollis Tate opened the door of the earthen house, he had to dig his way out through 6 feet of drifted snow. The world outside was unrecognizable. The valley below was a single sheet of white. Smoke rose from only a handful of chimneys. The tally, when it was finished, was grim. 4 men dead. Old Eli Foster, who had lived alone in a wooden cabin at the end of Cottonwood Lane for 41 years, ran out of firewood on the morning of the 24th. His neighbors found him sitting upright in his chair with his hands folded in his lap, as if he had simply chosen the moment. The 2 Whitford brothers, who lived together in a tar paper shack on the edge of town, were found on the 26th, 20 feet from their own back door. They had gone out for firewood and lost their way in the whiteout. 20 feet. And old man Peterson, who had refused to leave his cabin on the river bend, was found by his nephew on the morning of the 27th. 17 others lost portions of fingers and toes and ears and noses. Mrs. Coombs's husband would spend the next 40 years of his life unable to button his own collar. The Hollowmere blizzard of December 1893 would be remembered in that valley for 130 years. Hollowmere had been wounded. Hollowmere had not died. The story of Nora Beaumont spread through the valley like a thaw. Hollis Tate told it first, sitting in the back of Eunice Brackett's store with a cup of coffee in his trembling hands. He told it to whoever would listen, and many people listened. He told it without embellishment. He told what he had seen. He told what he had heard. He told them about the door opening at 3 in the afternoon, and the door opening again at midnight, and the man on the floor by the stove. Cyrus Beaumont stood up in church on the first Sunday in January. He said what he had been told to say. He said it badly, and quietly, and with his head down. But he said it. The congregation listened in absolute silence. Reverend Holloway did not speak at all when Cyrus was finished. He simply nodded, once, and led them all in a long prayer. In the spring, 3 families whose houses had failed in the storm came up the path to ask Nora to teach them what she had done. She did. She worked beside them. She did not charge them. Helena Standing Elk came down from her grandfather's camp and worked beside them too. By the next winter, there were 4 earth-sheltered homes on the south slope of the Crow's Shoulder. By the winter after that, there were 11. Bram Coltrane, the 19-year-old who had bet $5 on her death, came up the path in February of 1894. He stood at the door with his hat in his hands. He said, "Mrs. Beaumont, I was the worst of them. I said the worst things. I would like to learn how to build what you have built. I would like to spend the rest of my life making up for the things I said." She looked at him for a long time. "Come in," she said. "Take off your boots. We will start tomorrow at dawn." Bram Coltrane became her best student. He built 37 earth-sheltered homes in his lifetime across 3 Montana counties. He named his first daughter Nora. Tsequaki Standing Elk died in the autumn of 1896. Helena brought his bones up to the Crow's Shoulder for the funeral because the old man had asked. He was buried at the edge of Nora's garden, beneath a flat stone with no name carved on it. Helena stayed in the valley after that. She married a Salish trapper from the Bitterroot. She visited Nora every spring until the day Nora died. Hollis Tate married Eunice Brackett in 1897. They were both in their 60s. They sat together on Eunice's front porch every summer evening for the next 19 years, holding hands without speaking. Juno lived to be 14 years old. He died on a warm afternoon in May of 1902. Lying in a patch of sun outside the door of the earthen house, with Maddie's hand resting on his head, they buried him beside Tsequaki. Maddie carved the marker himself. It said simply, "Juno, friend, good boy." Cyrus Beaumont kept his promise. He spent the rest of his life as a quiet man. He never married. He served as the trustee of the Hollowmere Widows Fund for 31 years. He died in 1924. The fund still exists. It still gives small grants to widows in Ravalli County. It does so to this day. Matty Beaumont grew up tall and brown-haired and gentle. Like his father, he went to the university in Missoula. He came home to Hollowmere and became a teacher. He married a girl from Stevensville named Adele. They had 4 children. Nora lived long enough to hold all 4 of them. Nora Beaumont died on the 18th of April, 1923, at the age of 63. She died in her own bed. In the earthen home she had dug with her own hands 30 years before, the walls had held, the roof had held. The stove had been replaced twice. The buffalo hides were long since gone. But the earth had kept its slow, warm heart every winter for 30 winters, and she had never once been cold again. She was buried beside Juneau and Sikwaki. In the small graveyard at the edge of her garden, her stone read Nora Beaumont, beloved mother who listened to the mountain. By the 1970s, during the energy crisis, researchers from universities across the country had begun rediscovering earth-sheltered architecture. One graduate student spent a summer documenting the homes on the Crow's Shoulder. She had heard the local stories. She did not believe them at first. What she found astonished her. 11 of the original earth-sheltered homes were still standing. 7 of them were still inhabited. The thermal performance of Nora Beaumont's original house, the very first one, outperformed every wood frame home in the valley by a factor of more than 2. The interior temperature, even in the coldest weeks of January, never dropped below 55 degrees without supplemental heat. With a small wood stove, it held a comfortable 68. The principles Nora Beaumont employed in 1893 were essentially identical to those used today by the United States Antarctic Program in the construction of its winter overstations. The Acadian widow had been 100 years ahead of her time. She had not invented anything. She had only remembered, "The earth has a heart that beats slowly, my child. The summer sun sinks into the stone and falls asleep there. And even in the deepest winter, if you know how to listen, you can hear it breathing." Friends, I want to leave you with this. There is a kind of wisdom that does not come from books. It comes from grandmothers. It comes from old men sitting by fires. It comes from the women who built stone walls in places where the wind would not let trees grow. It is patient. It is quiet. It is older than any country, and it will outlast every country. It does not shout over the storm. It listens to the storm until the storm grows tired and tells it the truth. Nora Beaumont did not conquer her mountain. She did not defeat her grief. She did not punish her enemy. She listened. She listened to a song her grandmother had sung her when she was 7 years old. And she trusted it. And she let it lead her down into the warm, dark heart of the earth. And the warmth was waiting for her. It had been waiting for her all along. It is waiting for you too. Whatever cold has come into your life, whatever winter you are sitting in tonight, the earth keeps warm. The earth does not judge. The summer sleeps in the stones beneath your feet, and you only have to be brave enough and humble enough to dig. Thank you for listening. If a grandmother in your own life ever taught you wisdom that carried you through hard times, I would love to hear about her in the comments. Good night, friends. Stay warm.